Chapter 2081. Sisterly was also happy. Seeing that the little girl didn't come downstairs for breakfast, she understood that the young couple had slept a little late last night. It wasn't that her sisterly was praising her family, but the young master's stamina and physical fitness were amazing. Yes, this was the legendary 7 times in one night. Sisterly thought happily, Miss was really blessed. What's the use of a man being good-looking? Even if he was good-looking, he still had to be useful. Look at the young master's face today, his nose was straight. One look and you could tell that he was a man among men. The consumption was too much, he had to replenish it. Sisterly happily brought the soup and water over. Although Yi Muyun felt that it was a bit unscientific to have such a tonic for breakfast, it was also the old lady's kind intentions. He couldn't bear to ignore her and drank it in one gulp. Sisterly was satisfied and happily sent the young master off. She felt that she already had a little young master and little miss in front of her. It would be best if they could have 2 at once. When Yi Muyun went to the company, he first summoned Manager Lin. Mr. Yi had summoned him twice. Manager Lin's face lit up, and she proudly walked into Mr. Ye's office in high heels. Don't think that Mr. Yi was just a vice president now. One had to know that there were only 2 people above Mr. Yi. One was President Zhao Yi. Who was that person? He was President Tang's stepfather, and who was Mr. Yi? President Tang's son-in-law, the future successor of Bo Yi. Who in the company didn't want to curry favor with Mr. Yi? Manager Lin didn't have the chance before, but now that she had the chance, she had to use all her strength to curry favor. But she knew that no matter how handsome Mr. Yi was, no matter how capable he was, she couldn't seduce him. After all, Bo Yi was Tang. That's it. Yi Muyun pointed. Manager Lin looked at it from half a meter away and nodded. Okay, Mr. Yi, I will contact him. I just don't know if the appearance fee will be paid from the company or personally. Yi Muyun said lightly, tell me the number, and I will write you a personal check later. Manager Lin indicated that he understood. Just as he was about to leave, he noticed a small hickey on Chairman Ye's neck. If he didn't pay attention, he wouldn't have noticed it. Looking closely, it was still warm and fresh. She thought to herself, no wonder Mr. Yi was late, so early in the morning. Yi Muyun stretched out his hand and touched it. Thinking about how he and Shui had a good relationship, he wanted to be ruthless. Shui seemed to have bitten his neck a few times. At that time, he was feeling hot and didn't pay attention to it, but now he remembered. Young men naturally couldn't let go of this kind of thing, especially when it was a member of the opposite sex that he wasn't familiar with. So young Mr. Yi nodded and said in a reserved manner, I got it. You can leave first. Manager Lin understood. It seemed that Mr. Yi was still a newbie. She went out and closed the door. Yi Muyun had already got up and walked quickly to the bathroom, carefully checking his neck in the mirror. He reached out to pull his shirt, but it still couldn't stop it. He frowned and narrowed his eyes. At this time, Gu Zhe came in and said lightly, Mr. Yi, the meeting is about to start. Yi Muyun checked himself in the mirror for a while, then stood up straight. Okay, I will be there in a moment. He thought that not everyone was as meticulous as Manager Lin, right? Chapter 2082. After the meeting, Yi Muyun looked down and found that the expressions of his subordinates were a little intriguing. He paused for a moment and said lightly, everyone, write a report for today's meeting. I want to see it on my desk before I get off work. There was a lot of wailing, but he calmly got up and left the meeting room as if he didn't see it. Gu Zhe followed him. Yi Muyun didn't go back to the office. Instead, he went to the smoking area, leaned against the aisle, and quietly lit a cigarette. Gu Zhe leaned against the seat opposite him and smiled. Do you really want someone to write a report? Just because I saw the hickey on your neck. Yi Muyun glanced at Gu Zhe and said, nonsense. Gu Zhe smiled and said, I heard from Manager Lin that you want to find a young and good-looking person to play the piano. Yi Muyun nodded, threw away the cigarette butt, and stamped it out with his calf leather shoes. He said lightly, Zhou Chongguang was sent to the hospital by me. So you want to find someone to seduce your sister? Gu Zhe shook his head and laughed. Mumu is only 14 years old. Yi Muyun suddenly narrowed his eyes and looked at Gu Zhe. How did you know about this? Gu Zhe was silent for a while before he said, it was Cher who warned Gu Mei not to have anything to do with Zhou Chongguang anymore. Gu Zhe sighed and said, in fact, I don't want her to still miss Zhou. You should know how I feel. Yi Muyun was silent. Gu Zhe continued, Cher is very concerned about you and Mumu. After that, Gu Zhe left first. Yi Muyun stood there for a while, smoked a cigarette, and carefully thought about Gu Zhe's words. After a long time, he smiled. During the lunch break, he asked his secretary to order a bouquet of lilies and took it to the hospital. In the VIP ward of Xingyuan Hospital, Yi Muyun pushed the door open and entered. In the large ward, there were only Zhou Chongguang and a little nurse, who was helping to change the drip. Yi Muyun looked over and saw that Zhou Chongguang's face was covered with white gauze, like a mummy. He pulled a chair aside and put the bouquet of lilies on the small table next to the bed. Do you like lilies? Zhou Chongguang originally thought it was a doctor, but when he heard his voice, he slowly turned his head and looked at the bouquet of flowers with a slightly frightened gaze. With great difficulty, he opened his mouth and said, Take it away, take it away. Yi Muyun smiled faintly and shrugged. She took out a cigarette and lit it. Her tone was indifferent. I'll wait here for you to change your mind. After the nurse was done with the drip, she looked down and saw that it was Yi Muyun. She nodded and said, Mr. Yi. Then, she noticed that there was something wrong with Zhou Chongguang's expression. She looked at the bouquet of flowers and said hesitantly, Mr. Yi, the patient seems to be allergic to lilies. Should we take them outside? Yi Muyun asked the nurse seriously, will allergies kill people? The nurse was stunned for a moment, then shook her head. Usually not. But the patient will be in a lot of pain, especially Mr. Zhou, who has injuries all over his body. It's good that he won't die. Put the medical fees on my account. Yi Muyun's tone was very calm. Now, you can leave first. The nurse hesitated for a long time, then finally gave in. With Yi Muyun's status, even the director didn't dare to do anything to him, let alone a little nurse like her. The nurse went out and even considerately closed the door. Chapter 2083. At this moment, Zhou Chongguang's face had already turned purple. Half of it was from anger, and the other half was from the pollen. His two eyes stared at Yi Muyun, and his voice was hoarse. What do you want to do? Yi Muyun didn't say anything. He just leaned there and smoked, his expression calm. Finally, Zhou Chongguang couldn't take it anymore, and he sneezed. Then, it was the second one, the third one, and he simply couldn't stop. All the wounds on his body were affected, and they trembled. It was simply inhuman torture. At this moment, Yi Muyun's voice slowly sounded, I've investigated, you're allergic to lilies. Zhou Chongguang, are you in pain now? Zhou Chongguang's eyes were very deep, and he kept staring at Yi Muyun. He had the backbone not to say a word. Allergies made him very painful, and it was almost a living hell. He knew that if he opened his mouth, he would end the pain, but he couldn't. He, who had lost Qin Mu, could easily become the meat on Yi Muyun's chopping board again. He chose this path, and he had no intention of turning back. Zhou Chongguang didn't let go, and Yi Muyun just watched him in pain, and in the end, his body was simply twitching. Before dying, Yimuyun reached out and pressed the emergency button. When the doctor was in a hurry, Zhou Chongwang's gaze suddenly turned to Yimuyun, and there was a trace of a strange smile in his eyes. Yimuyun sneered. If he couldn't kill him, it would really be difficult. Zhou Chongwang was saved. Yimuyun carried the bouquet of lilies, threw it into the trash can at the entrance of the hospital, turned around, and left. A slender figure turned around the corner, quietly watched his car leave, and then walked into the hospital. It was Qin Mu. She was wearing an unisex sweater, and her face was covered by a mask, so it was impossible to see her face clearly. A few minutes later, she stood at the entrance of the VIP ward. She looked at Zhou Chongwang lying there lifelessly. Her slender and fair palms were pressed flat against the glass. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she controlled herself and didn't enter the room, nor did she want to disturb him. She watched him for 10 minutes. After making sure he was still alive, she left quietly. Zhou Chongwang, who was lying on the sickbed, suddenly opened his eyes. There was a sharpness in his eyes that he had never seen before, as well as a hint of a cold smile. When Yimuyun returned to the company, he was surprised to see Cher. He pulled his tie, walked to the sofa, and sat down. He smiled. Why are you here? There's nothing to do at home. Cher leaned on his shoulder. I want to ask you where you've been. He smiled. You're here to check on me. Yeah. She leaned on his shoulder and sniffed around like a puppy, which made him not know whether to laugh or cry. He grabbed her long hair and asked, Do you smell anything, Mrs. Yi? It smells like disinfectant. The little girl wrinkled her nose. She was quite good at acting. Tell me, who did you bring to the hospital, to destroy the evidence of your crimes? Yimuyun laughed. What kind of evidence could there be? Tell me. She leaned on his shoulder, bit his ear, and said softly. Yimuyun looked at her with a peculiar gaze. Shwa, do you want a child? I don't. She denied it with a blush and bit his neck. Mr. Yi, you haven't explained it clearly. Chapter 2084. He asked shamelessly, but I'm just one woman. Do you think I should tell you in detail? Shwa cried out, saying that he was shameless. But the more she behaved like this, the more he wanted to bully her. He held her little face in his arms, leaned close to her ear, and told her how he wanted her in detail, without skipping any details. The little girl couldn't stand it. Her little face was so red that it was about to bleed, and her ears were red. She wanted to break free, but he could easily control her with a little force. In the end, she couldn't stand it anymore and called him brother in a particularly seductive voice. Yimuyun's heart suddenly seemed to be full of unspeakable satisfaction. He grabbed her little ear as if he were holding a small animal, and his voice was soft and incredibly gentle. Baby, you're trying to make me happy, aren't you? She shook her head and then nodded again. Her stupid look was killing him. After kissing her for a while, he let go of her and got down to business. After the engagement, you'll accompany Mumu to the United States. It'll be too obvious if my mother goes there. I'll be able to focus my work on New York in about a month. He hugged her tenderly. Cher nodded. I'll take good care of Mumu. I believe you. Cher, I've always thought that you were a child, but now I only trust you. He kissed her forehead. You can't make it clear. Otherwise, Mumu won't be able to stand it. I think only when we separate will she be more indifferent. Besides, you should organize more parties in the United States. He thought that anyone could be with Mumu, as long as it wasn't Zhou Chongwang, who was like a time bomb. Shwa obediently lay in his arms and nodded. I will. I will make Mumu chubby. The brother smiled and pinched her little face. It would be better if you could make yourself fat. After a pause, he couldn't help but say something ambiguous. How does Mumu feel? That's what her husband needs to worry about in the future, and as he spoke, his palms became a little unruly. Snow, of course, sensed it. She immediately wrapped her arms around his waist and stopped him shamelessly. Not here, she was still young and couldn't accept it in a place like the office. Yimuyun looked down at her little face and knew that she couldn't accept it, so he smiled and didn't force her. He just carried her to the lounge, put her on the bed, and leaned over. When I get off work, we'll eat outside. Shuai grunted in acknowledgement. She suddenly hooked her little arms around his neck. If Qinmu forgets about Zhou Chongwang, how will you deal with him? There was a deep look in Yimuyun's eyes, but he didn't say anything. He just reached out and rubbed her hair. It was then that Snow realized that he wasn't going to let Zhou Chongwang go. He was probably going to kill him. As for Zhou Chongwang and Mumu, Zhou Chongwang was indeed inhumane. His father had passed away, but it was an accident. Mumu clearly had that disease, but he still provoked him and did that. He really deserved to die. His father had passed away, but it was an accident. Mumu clearly had that disease, but he still provoked him and did that. He really deserved to die. A smile appeared on Cher's fair face and she said softly, no matter what you want to do, don't let Mumu know. Chapter 2085. Yimuyun stared fixedly at her for a long time. She reached out to rub her hair and said hoarsely, I know. This was the first time he felt that their hearts were connected. This joy was even greater than the first time he had her. At the peak of their passion, he did not say anything and merely hugged her, allowing himself to feel the beating of her little heart. He had never felt this way before, she was his. Baby, thank you, for letting me have you. His voice was low and husky as he hugged her. She did not know why he was so emotional all of a sudden. However, a hug without any desire was something no girl would reject. She lay in his embrace obediently until he had to go to work. Cher waited for him to leave before rolling around on the bed twice. It was only then that she felt that she needed a bestie to tell her that she liked someone and that she was in love with someone. That person was her brother whom she had grown up with, but after thinking about it and pulling out a bunch of her hair, she realized that other than sisterly, there was no one else she could tell. Cher sat up and crossed her legs. She cleared her throat and said to the air in a serious tone, Auntie Lee, let me tell you something. Even though it's a little surreal, it's true. She started acting seriously. That's right, I think I'm in love with my brother. Don't you find it funny? As she said that, her face fell. Sigh, how can I say that to sisterly? That's so embarrassing. She'll definitely say that I'm bored. She won't. She'll be really happy. A man's voice rang out from the door. It was clear and melodious. Snow jumped in fright. She turned around, and then froze in shock. Yimuyun came in to get something before pinching her little nose. Next time, just say those words to me. Don't scare the elderly. With that said, he chuckled out and walked toward the door. The door closed as Cher covered her face and lay on the bed stiffly. That was way too embarrassing. Outside the door, Yimuyun's deep laughter could be heard. All the unwillingness and anger that Zhou Chongwang had brought to him had been soothed by this little fool. He got off work very late, but the incident with Rongguang was a fatal blow to his career. It was not until 7 o'clock that he closed his notebook and remembered that there was a little fool in his lounge. Ignoring the fact that Guze was still there, he quickly walked into the lounge and saw that the little person was sleeping soundly on the bed like a white piglet. He couldn't help but laugh. He rubbed his temples and said to Guze behind him, you can get off work first. After a while, he changed his mind. Forget it, wait for me. Guzé smiled and guessed what he meant. He went outside to get Mr. Ye's coat and keys and stood guard at the door. Sure enough, after a while, Mr. Yi came out with his piglet in his arms. Guzé thoughtfully covered the piglet with his coat. He also had a principle in his heart: Mr. Yi could get sick, but the piglet couldn't. Yi Muyun glanced at Guzé and entered the elevator. Later, the car was still driven by Guzé. Yi Muyun sat in the back seat and held the little fellow the whole time. The black supercar drove all the way to Pei Garden. Unexpectedly, Pei Garden was brightly lit. Guzé hesitated for a moment. Mr. Yi, I won't bother you anymore. He got out of the car, opened the door for Yi Muyun, and then drove away. Chapter 2086. Cher woke up when she got out of the car. She opened her eyes, looked at Yi Muyun, and said in a soft voice, "Brother." Yi Muyun lowered his head and pressed it against her forehead. His voice was very soft. "Mom and Dad are back." At the beginning, the little girl, who had just woken up, was a little confused, but after 2 seconds, she immediately struggled to get out of the car and ran towards the hall. But she ran too fast and almost bumped into Sisterly. Sisterly patted her chest. "Miss, slow down, what if you fall?" Cher made a sound and wanted to run again, but her body was held by a big palm, followed by Yi Muyun's laughing voice. "Cher, don't you have something to say to Sisterly?" The little girl's little face suddenly turned red, and she felt very guilty. She stammered, "No, brother, did you remember wrong?" The one who answered her was the serious Mr. Yi. "Did you forget that you thought for a long time in the lounge today about what you wanted to tell Sisterly?" "Ha!" The little girl's face turned red. Sisterly's appetite was also aroused, and she asked in confusion, "What do you want to say?" The little girl stammered even more. "Forgot. How could you forget at such a young age?" Sisterly was very fond of her. "Later, Sisterly will give you more things to nourish your brain." Cher breathed a sigh of relief, but Yi Muyun, who was behind her, said very kindly, "Do you want me to remind you what you want to say to Sisterly?" Sisterly's eyes lit up. Yi Muyun's voice was even lighter. "Sisterly, Xiaoxin regards you as her best friend, and has something to say to you." Sisterly's eyes were simply shining with green light, staring straight at Cher. Cher felt a lot of pressure. She looked at Yi Muyun sadly. It was all his fault. It was all his fault. Too abominable. Yi Muyun chuckled and whispered into her ear, "Sleep in my room tonight." The little girl didn't dare to agree because her daddy and mommy were back. Although they used to sleep together when they were young, now, it was different. While Cher was hesitating, Yi Muyun said, "Sisterly, Cher means." Before he could finish, Cher's voice sounded, "I agree." She was afraid that he would say it out loud. Yi Muyun chuckled and held her little hand as they walked into the main house. He turned around and looked at Sisterly, who was dumbfounded. Cher said, "Your cooking is delicious." Sisterly was obviously disappointed. This was it. What happened to being best friends? As soon as little Xinshin saw Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi, she threw herself at them and affectionately called them Daddy and Mommy. Yi Muyun also greeted Uncle Tang and Auntie Pei politely. After a round of intimacy, little Xinshin was hugged by Pei Chi-Chi to check every bone and every piece of skin. Of course, Pei Chi-Chi naturally saw that there was a strange thing on her daughter's neck. It was a kiss mark. She looked at Yi Muyun quietly without batting an eyelid. There was a faint reproach in her eyes. "Can't you wait for a few days?" Yi Muyun received her gaze and coughed lightly to show his acknowledgement. Pei Chi-Chi gave Tang Yu a look. As her father, he didn't say anything and invited them to have dinner together. After dinner, Tang Yu said calmly, "Cher, you and your mom haven't chatted for a long time." I haven't sparred with Mu Yun for a long time. He looked at Yi Mu Yun. Aren't you busy with work tomorrow? Chapter 2087. He looked at Yi Mu Yun. Aren't you busy with work tomorrow? Uncle Tang is in the mood, so I should accompany him. Yi Mu Yun smiled bitterly in his heart, but on the surface, he put on a decent smile. It was not easy to get Tang Yu's complete trust, but he did it, but the difference of a few days had beaten him back to his original state. He looked at Cher, which was basically a threat, wait for him in his bedroom tonight, or else he would tell Sister Li. Xiaoxin looked at him with tears in her eyes. Too bad. Pei Chi looked at them strangely, not knowing what the two little ones were up to. As for Tang Yu, he couldn't wait to beat up Yi Mu Yun until his face was swollen. Very soon, he arrived at the meditation room first. Yi Mu Yun also changed his clothes and went over. The moment he went in, a bamboo stick was thrown into his hand, and a fierce move was coming at him. Yi Mu Yun could only defend himself. He couldn't avoid this beating today, but he just hoped that it wouldn't be too embarrassing. So, after waiting for half an hour and giving face to his future father-in-law, he got beaten up. His back was hit 3 times heavily. Although it didn't break his flesh, his skin swelled up. He didn't dare to look back, but just said softly, again. In the end, he got hit about 7 or 8 times, and his back was almost not his, burning with pain. After beating him up, Tang Yu didn't say anything, but just curled his lips. You're so useless. Yes. I'll practice again in the future. He had to act more meticulously, so that his future father-in-law would feel good and be satisfied. When Yi Mu Yun left, he went upstairs with his back bent, and with every step, he felt like he was going to cough out his lungs. He felt that he had to be hospitalized, but it was too embarrassing. How could he be so weak? Also, he wanted to consummate their marriage tonight. He was really brave. The way he treated himself and Zhou Chongguang was simply double standards. He pushed open the bedroom door, but there was no one there. He didn't have the strength to look for her, so he lay on the bed, panting heavily. After lying there for more than an hour, the door finally creaked open. The door closed, and the little girl's soft voice rang out, "Brother, are you asleep?" This was what the young girl was thinking. If he fell asleep, she would leave again. Because she knew that he would definitely want her, and the sound he made would wake up Daddy and Mommy, and then, he would probably be beaten by Daddy. But when the little girl walked closer, she discovered that her omnipotent brother had already been beaten up. And he was beaten up so badly. "Brother!" She moaned softly, tugging at him. Yi Mu Yun had thought that he had fainted. Now that he had woken up, he opened his eyes and looked at the little girl in front of him. He forced a smile and said, "Cher, help me apply some medicine." As he struggled to move, his kimono fell to the ground. His back was covered in wounds, the little girl covered her mouth, and with a cry, she burst into tears. He was comforted in his heart. She finally knew how to care for him. But the little girl said after a while, "Do you have to change the person for this engagement? Brother, are you going to die? What happened to the telepathy?" He felt his vision go black. The little girl wiped her tears and said, "If it doesn't work, tell me, brother. You must find a substitute, like Zhou Chongguang, and I'll ask Manager Lin to pick someone similar to you." He gritted his teeth. "Tang Cher, are you taking revenge now?" "Ah, you can tell." The little girl covered her face. "Brother, you're the best." Chapter 2088. But when she applied the medicine, the little girl still felt sad. After applying it, she asked, "Brother, does it hurt?" Yi Mu Yun clenched his teeth and chuckled softly, "How can it hurt? Brother doesn't hurt at all." He, it really doesn't hurt. Shwa poked him lightly with her little finger. That doesn't hurt. Big brother, did daddy hit you so hard that you've lost your mind? This little fool. Yi Muyun clenched his teeth, not knowing what to say. Of course I'm not silly. After he said that, he felt that what he said was quite silly. Cher sucked in a deep breath. That's right, I know. It hurts. He had been feeling much better, but after she said that, it seemed that he was starting to hurt again. His body hurt, and his head hurt even more. But his heart was full. Actually, what was the pain? Wasn't she by his side? Yi Muyun stretched out his finger, clasped the little girl, and pulled her. Cher accidentally lay on his back, pressing on his wound. Yi Muyun let out a muffled groan, feeling extremely embarrassed. The little girl was frightened. She moved her little body, not knowing what to do for a long time. But every time she moved, it was like a death by 1,000 cuts to him. In extreme pain, Yi Muyun secretly sighed in his heart, she was sent by God to take care of me. Cher turned over with great difficulty and lay down beside him. Her little face was wrinkled, as if she was about to cry, brother. The wise and mighty Mr. Yi lay down and looked at his little girl. After a while, he coughed softly, do you know why your daddy hit me? The little girl buried her little face in the bedsheets, and after a while, she said vaguely, because, we live together. The injured Mr. Yi sneered and raised his hand to pinch her soft little face, you're not stupid. The little girl looked at him pitifully. After a long time, she pulled his arm and apologized in a low voice, brother, it's my fault. I seduced you. Mr. Yi sighed in his heart. This little fool, how could it be your fault? If I didn't have such thoughts, no matter what you did, I wouldn't have had those thoughts. However, his face was still serious as he coughed lightly, then how are you going to compensate me? Xiaoxin was still eager. She bit her little finger and looked at him. He looked at her little face and couldn't help but put his finger over for her to bite. The little girl whimpered pitifully, not daring to spit it out. With one hand, he pulled her closer to his chest and said in a low voice, you promised to sleep in my room. Now that I can't move, what should I do? Being bullied like this, the little girl's eyes were filled with pitiful tears. After a long time, she spat out a few words, I'll move. After that, she very attentively said, Big brother, quickly lie down. Yi Muyun gritted his teeth, do you think I can lie down now? The little girl wanted to cry again. Her sniffling was actually a little playful, probably because she knew that he liked it. In the end, she still wanted to make him happy, so she thought of a way and crawled over. Yi Muyun was also stunned. He never thought that one day, she would do this for him. God, she was still so young. Chapter 2089. The little girl sniffled as she replied to him, from the manga. Then, all of his self-control collapsed. In the end, he was so embarrassed that he lay on his side and looked at his girl. His voice was soft. Xin, you've learned to be bad. He was injured, so she had to do the cleaning. After that, she lay on her stomach and pretended to be dead. Yi Muyun was a person who loved cleanliness, and she cleaned up in a mess. In the end, he endured the pain and went to wash himself. Looking at himself in the mirror, Yi Muyun chuckled. He was so embarrassed, but he was so happy. He dragged himself back to the bedroom. The little girl was already asleep. She was lying on her stomach with saliva dripping from the corner of her mouth. Yi Muyun shook his head and smiled. He covered her with the quilt and lay next to her. Actually, his body was not satisfied. He felt very uncomfortable when she messed around just now. But now, looking at her like this, his heart calmed down. Lying next to her and looking at her little face, He felt like he was holding her hand and growing old with her. All the trouble seemed to have been blown away. Mr. Yi was Mr. Yi. After a beating, he was full of energy again the next day. When they went downstairs for breakfast, Tang Yu glanced at him indifferently, expressing his satisfaction. His body was great. Yi Muyun nodded politely. Uncle Tang, Auntie Pei. Tang Yu nodded lightly, while Pei Chi smiled. After the engagement, you can call me Mom and Dad. Just call me Mom and Dad from now on. She looked at Tang Yu. Are you Tang Yu? Tang Yu reached out to her. Come here. He pulled Pei Chi onto his lap and fed her breakfast. Yi Muyun looked at them and thought that half of the reason why he was able to enter the Tang family was because of Tang Yu's love for his wife. Thinking about the reason why Tang Yu had given him the power so early, he sighed. What's more, he wanted to have a child with Cher now, so that he and Cher could travel around the world when they were still young. The company would be left to their son. However, he could only think about it. Cher was so young, and he didn't want her to have a child so early. Tang Yu looked at Yi Muyun and asked, Where's Cher? She's still sleeping. Yi Muyun said with a hint of gentleness. Tang Yu didn't ask further. After breakfast, Pei Chi and Yi Muyun talked about the engagement. Pei Chi was a woman after all, and she had her own thoughts. Yi Muyun sighed in his heart. His little girl wasn't as attentive as his mother-in-law. She was still a child. After discussing with him, Pei Chi smiled. Let's invite Anlin and Liangqiu to dinner tonight. We haven't seen each other for a long time. Although it was a meeting between acquaintances, Yi Muyun knew that this was a formal marriage proposal. Of course, it was up to the groom. I'll arrange it. Yi Muyun thought for a moment. Let's set it at Wenhua Hotel. I'll ask the driver to pick you up at 6 p.m. Tang Yu and Pei Chi were very satisfied with him. This child grew up in the Tang family, but he was basically left to fend for himself. He even took care of Cher. As his parents, they reflected on themselves. In fact, they were the ones who took advantage of the Qin family. This family dinner was very well arranged by Yi Muyun. The parents of both sides also attached great importance to it, especially the two madams, who were dressed quite grandly. Chapter 2090. On the other hand, Cher was the only one who wore a jumper and a pair of skinny jeans. Her hair was tied up in a bun and she came over simply. The adults all shook their heads and didn't agree, because Muyun's posture was straight and upright. Even the two little ones, Qin Mo and Qin Mu, were wearing formal attire. Wasn't this bride-to-be a little too casual? When Cher came in, she also found that the scene seemed to be a little big. Didn't they say that they were going to have a meal with their family? Why was everyone so grand? Yi Muyun smiled. She probably doesn't know. No matter how stupid Cher was, she understood what was going on. She gave him a reproachful look and whispered, Why didn't you say so earlier? It's my fault. He held her little hand, rubbed it gently, and pulled her to sit down with him. The table was full of adults. Almost all of them were talking to Yi Liangqiu and Pei Chi. Yi Muyun would occasionally reply with a smile and was polite all the time. As time went by, Cher, who originally didn't have anything to say, became a little shy. It was clearly a meal, but it gave her a feeling that she was proposing a marriage. Okay, the little girl finally understood. Yi Liangqiu took out a gilded booklet with a long list of gifts on it. The daughter-in-law of the Qin family naturally couldn't be shabby. At the top was a manor-style villa named Qin Garden, which was for the young couple to live in after the engagement. There was also a list of movable and immovable property behind it, which was dazzling. Pei Chi thought for a while, took out a small part of it and returned the rest. Then she also took out a booklet, which was also a long list of dowries. The Tang family couldn't be careless when marrying off a daughter. Both sides were very happy, and just like that, they settled down. The atmosphere was still a little subtle. After all, it was a big matter, and both sides had to give face to each other. Only a little heart could keep eating and eating until its stomach was full. Pei Chi-Chi looked at her daughter several times, but she was still eating. Yi Muyun gave his mother-in-law a comforting look to show his indulgence. Therefore, everyone was at ease and did not ask for more. As long as Muyun liked it. Just as the atmosphere was harmonious, the door to the private room opened. The person who came in was not a waiter, but an unexpected person, Zhou Chongwang. His body was covered in gauze, and so was his face. He struggled to get in. Behind him was the exasperated manager. "You can't go in." But the door was already open. The atmosphere suddenly changed. The manager's voice trembled a little. "Mr. Qin, Mr. Tang, I'm sorry. We'll ask the security guards to come over." Yi Muyun's voice was very soft. "Hurry up and go." "There's no need for security," Zhou Chongwang said calmly. "I think it's the same even if Mr. Yi does it himself." As soon as he said that, everyone looked at Yi Muyun. Qin Anlan's old face was a little dark. He coughed lightly and said, "I was the one who hit him. It has nothing to do with Muyun. His son was just about to get engaged. He couldn't let the other party think that his son was so violent. Besides, he was the one who hit him." Qin Mu couldn't help standing up and said in a trembling voice, "Dad." Qin Anlan's expression became serious. "Mu, you should know why I hit him." Qin Mu pursed her lips. "It's not his fault. It's me, who likes him." Qin Anlan was angry, but in the end, he couldn't bear to expose Zhou Chongwang's plot. If that happened, Mu would not be able to bear it. Chapter 2091. Why? Qin Mu's voice was a little choked with sobs. "I can. He can wait for me to grow up." Qin Anlan still had to give his daughter some face. His face was gloomy, but he still restrained himself. "If you have anything to say, let's talk about it tomorrow. Today is the day of your brother's engagement." Zhou Chongwang suddenly said, "Today, I also want to propose to Mu. I hope Uncle Qin agrees." Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes. Was this kid deliberately going against him? Yi Muyun looked at Zhou Chongwang. "If you want to marry Qin Mu, we will respect her choice in 4 years." Zhou Chongwang looked straight at Qin Mu. "What about you?" Qin Mu was already standing. Then, she slowly walked toward Zhou Chongwang. Cher called out, "Qin Mu." Qin Mu turned around and looked at her. She smiled weakly and said, "Cher, I tried my best, but I couldn't convince myself to give up." She said softly, "I watched him play the piano for 2 years." No one knew that the reason why she could recover was because of Zhou Chongwang's playing of the piano. She was not infatuated with him, but dependent on him. She had long been unable to give up what she relied on for survival. Qin Mu's words were a great blow to Cher. She had always thought that Qin Mu and Zhou Chongwang had known each other for at most 1 or 2 months. She did not expect that it would be 2 years. Zhou Chongwang might not have done anything in the past 2 years, but all of this was Mu's deliberate plan. He had turned passive into active, and everything was very difficult. Both the Qin and Tang families were shocked by Qin Mu's words. Only Zhou Chongwang smiled faintly and said, "Mu, are you willing to be with me?" Qin Mu smiled slightly, and there was a hint of determination in her eyes. Things that he had been relying on for a long time were like drugs. It was impossible to quit. Yi Liangqiu's voice was very light. Mr. Zhou, I believe in your feelings for Mumu, and I believe in my silly daughter's stubbornness, but she is not yet of legal age. It's reasonable for her father to beat you up. Zhou Chongguang did not refute. Yi Liangqiu continued, Mu Yun is right. We won't stop him after 4 years. Also, don't use Mu Yun and Cher as an example. You two are different. As for what's different, you should know very well. Zhou Chongguang lowered his eyes. Yes. He looked up. I got it. He just glanced at Qin Mu, smiled faintly, turned around and walked out. He didn't make any more trouble, but the shadow he left was left in everyone's heart, especially Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu. They knew their daughter's mind so well. They also knew how terrible it would be if the disease relapsed. Qin Mu stood there for a long time before she said, I know my brother wants me to go to the United States. I'll go, but don't make things difficult for him. She was young, but she was more mature than Cher. She turned around, looked at her parents, and apologized bitterly. Who could blame a little girl who had been sick? At that time, she was so sick that only bones were left. Everyone had seen her. She was so fragile that she could leave them at any time. No one dared to take the risk. And Qin Mu's life could only be twisted again and again until she woke up. When she woke up, she felt that she had missed so much because of Zhou Chongguang. Chapter 2092. At that time, Zhou Chongguang was complacent, and she had been raised by him at home. To be honest, he was not mean to her. It was just that she looked at him and one day suddenly found that the person she loved had disappeared. He had not played for Alice, whom she depended on for survival, for several years. Epilogue. At this time, Qin Mu looked at the closed door and tears fell. No one had the heart to blame her, not even a harsh word. All of this was just an ill-fated relationship. That night, Yi Muyun and Cher stayed in the Qin's mansion. Although it was an important day, Yi Muyun did not pester his little wife. Instead, he patted her hand and said, I'm sorry to trouble you today. No. Cher half knelt in front of him and kissed the corner of his mouth. Speaking of which, I provoked Zhou Chongguang. Yi Muyun sighed. I was the one who drove him to the last. If Zhou Chongguang had never liked Cher, he could have agreed to this marriage, which was full of evil intentions. He could even persuade his parents to agree to it. He could offer very generous conditions to let Zhou Chongguang treat Mumu well, as if he had bought a senior servant. However, his relationship with Cher would hurt Mumu sooner or later. In this world, there was no impenetrable wall. In 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, Mumu would hear about Zhou Chongguang, Cher, and him sooner or later. At that time, could she bear such a blow? It was very embarrassing for Mumu to become a family. Her husband liked her sister-in-law. Yi Muyun was very distressed. He smoked a cigarette in front of Cher and patted her little face. Go and see Mumu for me. You are about the same age. It may be easier for her to tell you the truth. Hearing that, Cher sighed. She didn't tell me that she had listened to Zhou Chongguang play for 2 years. Yi Muyun let out a long sigh. Coax her and agree to let her be with Zhou Chongguang. But I'm going to New York next week. Cher nodded. She also had a vague feeling that Mumu was not the only one that Zhou Chongguang would not let go of. And her. At this time, Zhou Chongguang was like an angel of revenge. He could do anything. He seemed to have no scruples. Snow suddenly stopped in her tracks and turned her head to the side. He should have relatives too, right? Yi Muyun looked at her. He probably knew what she meant. He was a little surprised. Cher wasn't usually so ruthless. She must have been forced into a corner. He shook his head. This time, Zhou Chongguang has thrown himself into a dead end. It's useless to threaten him with anything. Cher didn't say anything, nor did she leave immediately. Instead, she looked at Yi Muyun quietly. After a while, she suddenly walked back and reached out to hug his waist. She hugged him with all her might and buried her little face in his arms. "Brother, don't worry too much. Moo will be fine." He held her waist, lowered his head and kissed her for a while. Then he said in a hoarse voice, "Cher, I'm very happy to have met you when I was 7 years old." Life was so short, and he was lucky enough to have loved her for so long. She obediently nestled in his arms. "Me too." The two of them hugged each other, and it was indescribably beautiful, but it was also a prelude to the storm. Cher went to see Qin Mu and came back after about 2 hours. Yi Muyun was leaning against the bed and smoking. It seemed that he had smoked half a pack. Chapter 2093. How is she? Yi Muyun watched her little body crawl over and automatically nestle in his arms. Her little body was a little cold. When she met him, she sighed comfortably. Yi Muyun put her little hands and feet in his arms and kissed her little mouth. Cher looked up and said, "She's quite calm." After a pause, she continued, "But I'm really worried. The calmer Moo is, the more worried I am." "No." Yi Muyun's voice was a little firm. "No matter what, we will never hand Moo over to Zhou Chongguang now." Cher felt even more uneasy. She was not stupid. She was not stupid. She could tell that between Moo and her, he had chosen her, not Moo. In fact, she knew that there was another way. That was, if she left him, then there would be no problem for Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang to be together. However, no one said that. Moo was like a patient with a terminal illness. There was a glimmer of hope, but the price was too high. No one mentioned it, and no one asked her to sacrifice herself. She herself did not dare to say it out loud. If she said it out loud, it would set off a bloodbath that was even greater than the matter between Zhou Chongguang and Moo. It was destined to be a sleepless night. She was, and so was he. She knew that he had gotten up in the middle of the night to smoke a few cigarettes outside. She did not know if he had considered this method, but when he came back, he did not say anything and just hugged her tightly. At that time, Cher thought that her brother was actually very pitiful. On one side was his sister, and on the other side was his relationship with her for more than 10 years. He must be feeling very uncomfortable. She stayed by his side obediently and accompanied Qin Mu. Qin Mu attended the engagement ceremony between her and Yi Muyun. The little pianist also came, but Qin Mu said that he was very ugly. Then, Zhou Chongguang also came. His injuries had already healed. Dressed in a black suit, he looked very handsome, but his expression was no longer the same as before. Cher saw the light in Qin Mu's eyes. It was the light of a girl in love. Cher thought that if Zhou Chongguang didn't say anything for the rest of his life and treated Moo well for the rest of his life, it would be good for Moo to be so happy all the time. At her engagement ceremony, she actually had such thoughts. "Mrs. Yi, focus." Yi Muyun hugged her and kissed her forehead. You looked at Zhou Chongguang for more than 10 seconds. Today, she was dressed in a white wedding gown. There was a diamond tiara on her forehead. It was custom-made by an Italian designer and was worth a few $100 million. It was his engagement gift for her. Today, she was indescribably beautiful. "He's not as handsome as Big Brother," the little girl said in a soft voice. She lay on his shoulder and danced with him. Her eyes, however, were still fixated on Qin Mu, looking at how happy she was. Would Qin Mu still be so happy after going to New York? Cher didn't know, but everyone had decided to let Qin Move take the risk, and she was no exception. The engagement ceremony was grand and lively, but she was absent-minded the whole time. She thought that her brother was the same. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let her be absent-minded for so long. On the night of the engagement ceremony, he chose to spend it in the presidential suite. Cher was carried by him and slowly walked out of the elevator. She put her little hands around his neck and pouted. What's the surprise? Chapter 2094. Cher looked at him and smiled coquettishly. What is it? Why are you being so secretive? Yi Muyun kissed the corner of her mouth. You can look forward to it. Cher hugged his neck tightly. He carried her with one arm and opened the door to the suite with the other. She let out a small scream the moment the door opened. The lights in the gorgeous suite were not turned on. Only the ceiling was decorated with countless little stars, warming up the dark night. The starlight paved the way, and he carried her inside. Black roses were placed randomly at their feet, making the night even wilder. They walked all the way to the bedroom. There was a huge heart-shaped cake on the French bed. The candlelight was already lit and there were two little people dancing on the cake. Cher looked at it and then looked at Yi Muyun with a shy look on her little face. He lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. He asked hoarsely, "Baby, do you like it?" She made a sound of agreement and tried to hug his neck. She turned her head sideways to look at the dancing flame with him. His forehead pressed against hers, and a ring appeared in his hand, slipping into her fingertip. "Happy birthday," he murmured. The engagement ring was given to Cher by Yi Muyun, but this is my gift to Xiaoxin. With that, he chuckled, little yellow bun. He threw her and danced in the candlelight. As he danced, he bit on his little yellow bun to his heart's content. Cher's bare feet stepped on his instep. There was no way for her to escape, she could only hug him tightly so that he could not bite her. The two of them messed around and fell onto the soft carpet together. He pressed her thin shoulders and kissed her gently. He ate her in small bites. Cher's eyes were like water. She reached out and lifted her body so that he could kiss her more deeply. The candlelight flickered and cast a pair of shadows on the wall. That night, they were in a frenzy. When Cher woke up at dawn, she was sleeping on the sofa. To be precise, she was sleeping in Yi Muyun's arms. He was 184 and she was only 162, so she looked very small in his arms. She opened her eyes and looked at his sleeping handsome face. Under the morning light, he looked especially young and handsome. She reached out her smooth little arm and gently touched the faint bruise on his chin. It was a little prickly. Just like that, she gently touched him and giggled, but he didn't wake up. Later, she mischievously leaned against his ear and screamed, "Brother, get up." He did not open his eyes, but he quickly grabbed her arm and pulled her into his embrace. His voice was clear and hoarse, "Schwer, sleep a little longer. I'm exhausted." Last night was crazy, he was almost exhausted, but this little guy was still so energetic. Mr. Yi reflected on himself in his heart. Did he go too easy on her? So he opened his eyes, looked at his little fellow, and smiled. Still want? Cher widened her eyes and shook her head vigorously. Of course not. However, he had already pulled her into his arms and said in a seductive voice, "I'll feed you more." Cher screamed, but her mouth was covered again. Then, she fell into his arms. When she woke up again, it was already afternoon. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the bed. The moment she opened her mouth, it was indescribably soft and a little hoarse. "Brother." Yi Muyun stood by the bed. The moment she woke up, he bit her little face. "You're awake." Chapter 2095. She moved her body and felt that there was nothing under the wool blanket. She looked up at him and said, "Brother. I'll help you get dressed and take you out to play, okay?" He smiled, took the neatly folded clothes from the side and began to help her get dressed. Cher curled up like a shrimp and her whole body was faintly red. She looked at him and said, "Brother, don't you need to go to work? I still have time to play with you for a day." He smiled gently and held her in his arms, kissing her while putting on the clothes. It was so sticky that Cher couldn't stand it. What happened to her brother's coldness? "Mr. Yi, when have I ever been cold in front of you?" After putting on the clothes, he patted her and said, "Go brush your teeth. I'll take you out after dinner." Cher looked at his clothes as she ran. They were similar to her in casual British style. He was very handsome. She made a face at him. "It'll be done in a while." When they sat together for dinner, she found that he hadn't eaten either. Her mouth was full. "Brother, why don't you eat first?" He didn't answer her but said lightly, "Do you still call me brother?" "I like to call you brother." The little girl wasn't afraid of him at all now. She raised her head and winked at him. He smiled and didn't say anything. He just took care of her needs and prepared food for her from time to time. "Do you like me?" he suddenly asked. Cher whimpered, "Brother, you're so annoying." He thought that she was indeed not afraid of him at all. This was good. After dinner, Cher's stomach was rolling and she didn't want to go out. In the end, he dragged her out. Both of them were wearing navy windbreakers. They walked together, obviously a couple's outfit. He held Cher's hand in his and she felt that he was caring for her. Moreover, she wasn't used to walking on the street like this, so she walked aimlessly. "Brother, where are we going?" she asked in a low voice. Yi Muyun tilted his head and smiled. "Just walking around. Don't you like to go out and play?" He pinched her little face. "Where do you want to go?" "A movie, a snack, a ride on the merry-go-round," she said, smiling sweetly at him. He agreed and carried her on his back. He thought, "I only have this kind of person, so what if I spoil him a little?" She followed him at such a young age, so he should treat her better. From the afternoon until nightfall, they adapted to their new identities. In the crowd, he held her hand and said softly, "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Yi." Her crescent moon-like eyes were filled with stars. "You too, Mr. Yi." He kissed her in the crowd, kissing the only love in his life. After a long time, he let go of her, held her little hand, and walked forward. Compared to the sweetness between Yi Muyun and Cher, the atmosphere in the Pei residence was gloomy. Yi Liangqiu was holding a medicine bottle in her hand. Her fingers were trembling and she could hardly hold it. "Anlin, Mumu is taking medicine." Qin Anlin reached out to take it. After looking at it for a long time, he opened it and counted the number of pills. "She has been taking it for days." Qin Anlin's voice was a little sad. "Liangqiu, we can't send Mumu abroad at this time." He closed his eyes. She has realized that there is something wrong with her. Chapter 2096. She could not forget the scene from a few years ago. Sometimes, she would even have nightmares. She dreamed that Mumu left them. Now, her illness had relapsed. How could she not tremble? Yi Liangqiu almost did not even have the courage to ask Qinmu, but she knew that Mumu needed treatment. Not only physically, but also psychologically. "Liangqiu, I was too impulsive." Qin Anlin's voice was a little cold. After a long time, he continued, "I'll talk to Mumu." Yi Liangqiu's fingers grabbed his arms so tightly that they almost sank into the flesh of Qin Anlin's arm. "Don't tell Mumu that Zhou Chongguang likes Cher." Her voice was sharp and almost hysterical. Qin Anlin held her hand and smiled comfortingly. Don't worry. I know what I'm doing. At this time, Qin Mu was like a frightened bird. She could not listen to any stimulating words. Qin Anlin just wanted to persuade her to cooperate with the doctor's treatment. As for the rest, he was willing to help her. It was like a patient with a serious illness. He knew that stopping the pain would not cure the root cause, but he would still use it. He thought that now Zhou Chongguang was Qin Mu's painkiller. Before Qin Anlin went upstairs, he called his secretary and asked him to help him make an appointment with Zhou Chongguang. He did not want Mu Yun to intervene in this matter. After all, Cher was in the way. After hanging up the phone, he walked upstairs. On the way, he looked at Liangqiu, who was sitting on the sofa. Liangqiu was still sitting, and her fingers were still trembling. Liangqiu, you'll be fine. Qin Anlin's voice was low and hoarse. As long as I'm here, you'll be fine. Yi Liangqiu's lips moved, and in the end, he squeezed out a smile. However, that smile was trembling. Qin Anlin paused for a moment and then walked upstairs firmly. Before dinner, Qin Mu was lying on the bed in the bedroom with a sketchbook in her hand. Seeing Qin Anlin come in, she naturally put it under the pillow and called Qin Anlin, Dad. Qin Anlin sat down slowly and reached out to rub her hair. What are you looking at? Qin Mu shook her head. You're drawing Zhou Chongguang. Qin Anlin asked with a smile. There were some fine lines between his brows. Qin Mu took it out carefully and said in a low voice, Yes. Qin Anlin calmly flipped through the pages and asked in a seemingly casual manner, You like him a lot? Qin Mu nodded, Yes. Do you have to marry him? Qin Anlin touched his daughter's head again. But you're still so young. You don't have to make a decision in a hurry, do you? Qin Mu nodded and leaned on Qin Anlin's shoulder. I know, Dad. She was so obedient, but she didn't know how worried her mother was. So was he. Qin Anlin wasn't afraid, but he had to be calm. Otherwise, Liangqiu would be afraid, and Qin Mu would be even more afraid. After hesitating for a moment, he took out the medicine and said softly, Mu, why did you take this medicine again? A year ago, she had stopped taking the medicine. The doctor said that she was in good condition and that she didn't need to take the medicine. But now, it was obvious that she had secretly taken it. Qin Mu looked at the medicine bottle and silently took it. After a long time, she nodded and said, I can't sleep. When did it start? Qin Anlin pulled his little daughter into his arms and stroked her hair lovingly. Qin Mu pursed her lips and lowered her eyes. Half a month ago. He counted the time. How could he not know? Chapter 2097. Perhaps Qin Mu was more sensitive than them. Perhaps she knew something, but she couldn't say it out loud. And as her father, he couldn't tear open her wound with his own hands. He just touched her little head and asked her softly, Mu, are you willing to see a psychiatrist? Do you know Dr. Zhang Mingyuan? Zhang Mingyuan was very young, only in his early 20s. He used to be the assistant of Mu's attending doctor, and now he was an authoritative psychiatrist. Moreover, the famous clinic was also opened by the Zhang family, and he had some friendship with Qin Anlin. Mu didn't need to worry about his privacy being leaked when he went there. Qin Mu raised his eyes and looked at his father. He was very calm, but she could see his anxiety. Qin Mu hugged Qin Anlin and buried herself in his arms. She asked in a low voice, Dad, is Mom very worried? Yes, your mom is very worried. She's about to cry. Do you want to comfort her? Qin Anlin's voice was low and hoarse, and there was a trace of helplessness in it. Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. Qin Anlin took her away. There were tears in Yi Liangqiu's eyes, which had not dried yet. Qin Mu threw herself into her arms and cried, "Mom, I'm very scared." She was also a child, and she also knew what it meant at the beginning. If she didn't get better, she would slowly become depressed, slowly become serious, and become the same as a few years ago. She didn't want that. She was very scared, but she didn't dare to say it. She was afraid to see her parents' sad faces. When she opened her eyes a few years ago, she could hardly recognize her beautiful mother. "It's going to be fine, Mumu." Yi Liangqiu hugged her slender body and kept comforting her. From beginning to end, Qin Mu didn't mention a word about Zhou Chongwang, but they all knew that Zhou Chongwang was her worry. Qin Anlin cancelled Qin Mu's plan to go to New York. When Gu Zhe came to tell Yi Muyun, he guessed something. That day, he stood in his office for a long time and smoked 2 packs of cigarettes. After work, he didn't go home, nor did he go back to Pei Yuan. Instead, he called Qin Anlin and asked him to meet outside. There were some things that he didn't want to say in front of his mother and Mumu. The place was a private room in a club. When Qin Anlin entered, Yi Muyun had already drunk half a bottle of wine. Although he was in a bad mood, Qin Anlin still patted his son on the shoulder and teased him. Muyun, you didn't used to drink." Yi Muyun smiled and smoked. I'm Muyun. I'm Yi Muyun." Qin Anlin sat opposite him, and Yi Muyun poured him a glass of wine. Qin Anlin drank it in one gulp, then said coldly, "Did you know? That brat Zhou Chongwang disappeared." Yi Muyun was silent for a while and then asked softly, "Dad, did something happen to Mumu?" Qin Anlin shook his head. "He secretly took medicine again. Let me deal with it. It's not that Zhou Chongwang didn't disappear, but he found a reasonable way to disappear. Don't forget that he's recuperating now." Yi Muyun's veins were bulging. He knew his parents' choice, and he couldn't blame them. But Zhou Chongwang was really ruthless. Qin Mu, to be honest, was also a little beauty with a calm temperament. But was Zhou Chongwang just using her? Right now, Zhou Chongwang was gambling that he, Yi Muyun, would back down. Chapter 2098. He knew that Zhou Chongwang wanted him to lose his most precious thing as revenge, and share was his most precious thing. That was why Qin Anlin didn't want him to intervene in this matter and chose to talk to Zhou Chongwang himself. Zhou Chongwang's disappearance had shown his attitude. The person he wanted to talk about was either Shui, or him, Yi Muyun. "I'll find him." Yi Muyun put out the cigarette in his hand and looked up. There was a deep look in his eyes. "Dad, I was careless." Qin Anlin patted him on the shoulder. "Not you. When I was young, I used the same tricks. Your Uncle Tang wasn't much gentler. Business is business. There are many cases of families being ruined. It's just that I hit a nail in the head. Zhou Chongwang was a born schemer and gave people a headache." The two of them only sat for a while before they left. Yi Muyun sat in the car and called Cher. He told her that he would stay at the Pei residence tonight. Cher nodded and didn't ask further. After he hung up, he called Gu Zhe. He wanted to find out where Zhou Chongwang was. He sat in the car with the window open and held the cigarette in his hand for a long time, until Gu Zhe called. "Mr. Yi, Zhou Chongwang is now in a nursing home in a small city in the south." Gu Zhe asked softly. "Do you need a private jet?" Yi Muyun threw away the cigarette in his hand. "We'll take off in half an hour." As he spoke, he stepped on the accelerator and turned the steering wheel in the direction of the airport. That night, Yi Muyun appeared in the nursing home. Zhou Chongwang was still awake. He sat in the courtyard and smoked. When he saw Yi Muyun and his 4 bodyguards, his expression didn't change at all. He just smiled faintly. You found him. Yi Muyun stood there, looking at Zhou Chongwang in the dark. It was a very cold night. Zhou Chongwang was only wearing a black shirt, but his face was clear. No wonder Mu was so devoted to him. Mr. Yi, my conditions have changed. I don't want King Entertainment's shares. Marrying Qin Mu is like having a death exemption gold medal. Zhou Chongwang chuckled. However, Mr. Yi might suffer some losses. They've just gotten engaged, so they'll probably have to separate. Who gave you that confidence? Yi Muyun's tone was especially cold. He raised his hand, and a few people immediately came up from behind and held Zhou Chongwang down. Zhou Chongwang's expression was somewhat indifferent. Are you going to do it yourself this time? Kill me in the end. But I think if I die, your precious sister will probably follow me. It's worth it. Zhou Chongwang's head was pressed against the bluestone slab. It was a little twisted and deformed, but it didn't affect his performance at all. Yi Muyun stepped forward and stepped hard on his head. Let's see whether Qin Mu can't wait or whether your life can't wait. He took out a gun, took out the clip, put a bullet in, and spun it a few times. Zhou Chongwang's face was a little pale. He had guessed what he wanted to do. Let's play a game. If you can't survive these 5 shots, then my sister will die with you. Yi Muyun's voice was cold. Then, he pressed the pistol against Zhou Chongwang's temple. We can start counting now. 1. The gun in his hand made a bang, but it was the sound of an empty bullet. It was empty. Chapter 2099. Zhou Chongwang's eyes looked particularly clear under the moonlight. It was the ambition that Yi Muyun was familiar with. Yi Muyun looked into his eyes, pursed his lips, and then fired the second shot. It was another blank bullet. Zhou Chongwang's forehead was covered in sweat, but he did not beg for mercy. If he begged for mercy, he would lose. What he wanted was to gamble with his life. There was a cruel sneer on Yi Muyun's lips. He fired 1 shot after another, but he missed 5 times. He didn't fire the 6th time. When he threw Zhou Chongwang down, Zhou Chongwang's shirt was covered in cold sweat. He sat on the big bluestone behind him and looked at Yi Muyun with a sneer. Mr. Yi, are you in pain now? He smiled mockingly. Unfortunately, I've been in pain before. Yi Muyun looked down at him. I'll give you 2 choices. Marry her or stay away from her. You want me to find a perfect reason to leave your sister? Are you afraid that she will be hurt? Zhou Chongwang smiled softly. No matter how embarrassed he was still smiling. Yi Muyun, I also said that you only have 2 choices. One is your baby sister, and the other is Tang Sher. He pushed away the person who was suppressing him, stood up unsteadily, and looked at Yi Muyun with a cold expression. I won't change my mind, or you can kill me. Do you think I don't dare? Yi Muyun raised the gun and pointed it at Zhou Chongwang. I've said that I want you to die with Mu. Zhou Chongwang covered his aching heart, slowly stood up, and smiled faintly. Shoot! Yi Muyun's fingers pressed down slightly, and a shrill voice came from the other side. Muyun, don't. Yi Liangqiu stumbled over, followed by Sher and Gu Zhe. Yi Muyun had never seen his mother in such a sorry state. He was a little stunned, but he didn't put down the gun in his hand. Muyun, you can't kill him. Yi Liangqiu held Yi Muyun's arm desperately and said in a trembling voice, Mom, please, don't kill him. Yi Muyun's voice was cold. After a while, he slowly said, What happened? Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes. Mumu committed suicide. Yi Muyun's body stiffened, and all the blood in his body seemed to freeze. How long has it been? Has Mumu's illness become so serious? He couldn't believe it, and he didn't want to believe it. Moreover, if he were to be cruel now and shoot Zhou Chongguang, he would be buried with Mumu. He couldn't do it, at least not in front of his mother. Mu Yun. I beg you. Yi Liangqiu sobbed. She had never been so fragile. Mumu can't be hurt. Yi Muyun looked at his mother quietly for a long time. His voice was even a little cold. Do you know Zhou Chongguang's request? Yi Liangqiu looked at her son. She also knew that Mu Yun had always been calm. Otherwise, he would not be so angry now. Yi Muyun looked at Cher, pursed his lips, and said slowly, Mom, why did you bring Cher here? Have you already made a decision in your heart? Have you decided to sacrifice her? Yi Liangqiu shook her head. No, but this note sounded so weak, so guilty. Yi Muyun's eyes were as calm as water. He looked at Cher and asked, What about you? Cher's face was pale, and she couldn't say a word. Chapter 2100. Yi Muyun looked at his mother again. Mom, I'm engaged to her, and I've slept with her. How could they split this? Moreover, he had never treated Cher out of responsibility, but out of love. Between Mumu and Cher, he was more willing to choose Cher. She was innocent, and he would not ask Shui to sacrifice her happiness for the sake of his sister. He did not consider himself, but stood in Cher's shoes. For him, no matter what the result was, it would be a lifetime of sin, and there was no redemption. However, he could choose to give his happiness to Shui, so that she could still be happy by his side. The night wind blew and disturbed everyone's hearts. Yi Muyun's voice was hoarse. Zhou Chongguang would rather die than force me. Mom, are you forcing me to make a decision? Yi Liangqiu almost couldn't stand still. Guze supported her from the side. After a long time, Yi Liangqiu finally stood up straight. She looked at Zhou Chongguang, pursed her lips, and said softly, Zhou Chongguang, I can give you all of King Entertainment. I think your anger should be gone. Please let my child go, okay? Zhou Chongguang's eyes were cold. Mrs. Qin, do you think everything can be compensated with money? He spat out a few words coldly. Don't worry. If Qin Mu dies, your son will kill me and bury me with her. In the night wind, Yi Liangqiu's no was very sad. Snow had been standing there the entire time, watching everything unfold. She was not a fool. Mumu was Auntie Ye's daughter. Between parting and life and death were naturally more important. If she were Auntie Yi, she would also choose to let Mumu live. Under the moonlight, her tears flowed down, but she did not feel it at all. She smiled softly, a little absent-minded. She looked at Yi Muyun and called out, Big brother. That call was like a dream, an illusion, and a shadow. Yi Muyun looked back at her. Their eyes met, and they stared at each other for a long time. After a long time, when his eyes were sore, she said softly, I'm going to America next week. Yi Muyun's body shook, and his voice was hoarse. Cher, what did you say? Cher lowered her eyes and said softly, Zhou Chongguang, I hope you can fulfill your promise. She paused for a moment. You take revenge on others, and one day, you'll be taken revenge on. As she spoke, she lifted her little face and let out a bright and beautiful smile. She walked towards Yi Muyun and hugged him tightly, as if this was the last time. Actually, this was also the last time. What is this? Yi Muyun's voice was cold. Tang Cher, have you ever asked for my choice? She hugged him tightly in his arms, and her voice was muffled in his chest. I know you'll choose to make me happy. But I don't want you to live in guilt for the rest of your life. I'd rather you hate me. She could not want that kind of happiness, and she did not dare to want it. It was too sinful. As she spoke, she slowly withdrew from his arms and wanted to leave. But her little body was caught by him at once, and his hand held her slender arm like a pincer, with a strength that threatened to break it. Cher looked down. Let go of me. Yi Muyun, I can't like you anymore. She began to struggle desperately. She cried and screamed at him, Moo is your sister. He was still holding her little arm, unwilling to let go. How could he give up on her? Chapter 2101. It's useless. She looked at him, and her tears fell one by one, hurting his heart. If something happens to Moo, I won't be happy. I'll live in the shadow for the rest of my life. She closed her eyes and threw herself into his arms again, hugging him tightly. However, she only hugged him for a while and then pushed him away. Yi Muyun reached out to grab her, but he couldn't. Instead, she snatched the gun from his hand. Cher walked toward Zhou Chongguang step by step until she was in front of him. She raised the gun at him, and with a bang, the only bullet went through Zhou Chongguang's leg. Blood gushed out, it splashed all over Cher, and there was some hot blood on her little face, which made her face look as pale as a piece of paper. You owe me this. Pay it back with your blood. Her voice was very faint. Zhou Chongguang, you win. Zhou Chongguang bent down, but he didn't fall down. He just looked at her. Cher didn't look at him again. She turned her head and looked at Yi Muyun in the night. His eyes were full of shock. It was too surprising that he didn't manage to catch her at the first moment. Shua looked at him carefully, as if she was trying to carve him into her heart. Then, she turned around and left, not looking back. Yi Muyun quickly stepped forward, but he felt a pain in the back of his head. His eyes were a little dazed, and he stood there for a while unwillingly. Finally, he fell down. Cher abruptly turned her head around. Under the moonlight, her tears were still wet. Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes and slowly knelt down. At this time, she admitted that she was selfish. Perhaps Mu Yun was right. She had brought Cher here as a final preparation. There was no way Shue didn't know that. She was just helping him. I'm sorry. Yi Liangqiu murmured, but she didn't know who she was talking to. Was it Cher or Mu Yun? She was actually shocked because of Mu Yun's choice. Zhou Chongguang slowly stood up. His leg was bleeding, but he didn't care. He looked at Yi Muyun and smiled faintly. Finally, just like him, he had also lost the most important thing to him. Cher disappeared. She disappeared on this very night. Yi Muyun searched the entire world, but he couldn't find her. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It was so long that he felt like he had given up. It was so long that Qin Mu came of age. It was so long that Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang got married. It was so long that Zhou Chongguang became one of the most powerful people in B City. Tang Cher still hadn't shown up. Later, he thought, she will not appear again. Later, he had a girlfriend. She was beautiful, gentle, and cute. He vaguely thought that since he had a girlfriend, she probably wouldn't have to hide from him anymore. He thought that from the moment he woke up that day, he hated her. He hated her choice. He hated her for leaving without saying goodbye. This kind of hatred faded day by day. It faded into the trivial life and the busy work. However, it was engraved in his bones. No one could see it. It was the 8th year of her disappearance. Yi Muyun became the CEO of Boyi. He held 20% of Boyi's shares. He was the most respected man in B City. All the influential people in B City were fawning over him, but he still felt lonely. He lived in the suite of GM Hotel all year round. He rarely went home, and even less returned to pay Yuan. Even if he went back occasionally, he would only visit Tang Yu and pay Chi-Chi. He would leave after a simple meal. Chapter 2102. At this moment, he was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of his office on the top floor of Boyi Hotel, looking down at B City beneath his feet. His heart was empty. He asked Gu Zhe about the stock market, his voice sounding a little tired. Gu Zhe said quietly, "Mr. Yi, Miss Song just called to ask you out for dinner." Yi Muyun didn't reply. Instead, he said mildly, "Still no news." Gu Zhe was stunned for a moment. Then, he understood who Mr. Yi was asking about. After a moment of silence, he said, "Someone saw her in New York before, but after looking for her, there was no news." Yi Muyun lowered his head, took out a cigarette, and lit it. After a long time, he exhaled. "Uncle Tang wants to help her. How can we find her?" He finally turned his head around. His face was clear and handsome. Compared to 8 years ago, he was a little thinner. He looked very indifferent, without much of a human touch. Gu Zhe pursed his lips and didn't say anything. It wasn't his place to interrupt. Back then, Gu Mei was sentenced to 3 years. After she came out, she became Zhou Chongguang's secretary. Gu Zhe didn't know if there was anything between them, and Gu Mei had never mentioned it. But these few years, Gu Mei and Zhou Chongguang were indeed very close. Fortunately, Zhou Chongguang was smart. Nothing happened between him and Qin Mu, and they looked like a normal couple. Gu Zhe would occasionally see them. Zhou Chongguang was as considerate and warm to Qin Mu as he was in the past. However, Gu Zhe felt that Qin Mu seemed to have become indifferent and was different from before. This was just his opinion as an outsider. Because of Gu Mei, he more or less kept an eye on Qin Mu. As he kept an eye on her, a few years passed. Time passed quickly. Gu Zhe forgot that he was 30 years old and alone. However, since Boss Yi had a girlfriend, he looked more lonely than him, who didn't have a girlfriend. After waiting for a long time for his response, Yi Muyun said indifferently, "Make an appointment with her at 8 tonight." As he spoke, he walked to his desk, put out his cigarette, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the office. His secretary said goodbye to him. Along the way, the staff looked at him and respectfully called him Mr. Yi. However, all of this had nothing to do with her. His life had nothing to do with her anymore. When he got off the elevator, Yi Muyun looked at himself in the mirror and said in a low voice, "Why? Why aren't you back yet?" But no one could answer him. He laughed at his own stupidity with a desolate look in his eyes. It had been 8 years. She had left for 8 years without a word. She had never returned. What was he waiting for? He laughed at himself and walked out of the elevator. The black sports car sped all the way back to the Pei residence. Qin Mo moved out of Yun City, Qin Mu got married, and the 2 kids were studying abroad. Only Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu lived here. Yi Muyun would go back about half a month. Sometimes, he would just sit there for a while and then leave. Back then, no one forced him or share, but the knot in their hearts was difficult to untie. During the 8 years, he thought that Qin Mu had probably noticed something, but she had never said anything. Perhaps Mu Mu had grown up and no longer needed anyone to protect her. And the person he wanted to protect was long gone. Yi Muyun got out of the car and walked to the main house. He didn't expect that Qin Mu would also be at his parents' house, so he slowed down. Qin Mu had already noticed him. The 22-year-old Qin Mu was more gentle than when she was young, and there was peace in her eyes. Those who hadn't come into contact with her would never know that Qin Mu had died several times in her teens. Chapter 2103. Yi Muyun had mixed feelings about his sister. He didn't blame her, but he didn't want to see her all the time, because his heart ached when he saw her. He indulged Zhou Chongguang's meteoric rise, and that man was very smart to mind his own business. He was really good to Qin Mu before and after marriage, and he was like a model husband. But in private, Zhou Chongguang was not without women. At least Gu Mei was. At least, the little star that Zhou Chongguang was raising looked like Cher. When Gu Zhe showed him the photo, he saw it. He didn't care. If Zhou Chongguang was Qin Mu's dream, then she was the one who woke up from this dream. Therefore, Yi Muyun didn't ask much about their affairs. Now that he saw her, he just smiled and said, "You're back." In early autumn, Qin Mu stood under an orange tree in the yard. She was wearing a light purple blouse and a beige dress, and her slightly curly brown hair reached her waist. She was already extremely beautiful, at least much more beautiful than the little star. Yi Muyun thought indifferently. Qin Mu saw him coming over and reached out to hold his arm. Yi Muyun was stunned for a moment. Over the years, although they were not unfamiliar with each other, they were not very close. At first, Mumu also asked where Cher was going, but he couldn't answer. Later, she stopped asking. After a long time, everyone was used to not having Tang Cher by Yi Muyun's side. Only he was not used to it. It took him 10 years to get to her side, and it took Cher one night for her to leave him. But it took him 8 years, and he still couldn't forget it. Maybe it would be like a thorn that couldn't be pulled out in this life. Who knew? "Brother," Qin Mu smiled, "I heard from Gu Zhe that you have an appointment tonight." Yi Muyun's girlfriend was called Song Karen. She was 24 years old. Her appearance was as sweet as her name, and she was also well behaved. However, Qin Mu did not think her brother liked her. At least, she had never seen her brother smile sincerely or look at Song Karen with such loving eyes. She thought, in her brother's heart, he still hasn't forgotten Cher. Yi Muyun was a little absent-minded because Qin Mu called him brother. In the past, there was a little girl who called him brother for 10 years. Even when they had sex for the first time, she cried and called him brother when she was in so much pain. He kissed her soothingly, telling her that it was her brother who wanted her, and she endured it. Yi Muyun lowered his eyes and said indifferently, "Qin Mu, why don't you focus on your marriage and manage it well?" Qin Mu looked up at him. After a while, she said quietly, "Brother, I want to divorce Zhou Chongguang." Yi Muyun tilted his head and stared at her. He stared at her for a long time. "Brother, don't make things difficult for him after we divorce." Qin Mu reached out and hugged his arm, leaning towards him. "I'm not helping him. I just don't want you to worry about me anymore." Yi Muyun's gaze was still fixed. "I'm fine." Qin Mu smiled faintly. "I just woke up from a dream." This dream lasted for 8 years. Actually, from the 5th year, or the 6th year, or the night of their wedding, she felt that this was a nightmare. It should be over. Yi Muyun looked at her carefully. After a while, he asked softly, "Why?" Chapter 2104. Yi Muyun didn't say anything and just rubbed his sister's hair. She had grown up and had her own ideas. If she wanted to continue living like this, he wouldn't object. If she wanted a divorce, he wouldn't object either. As for Zhou Chongguang, let him be. Perhaps he should thank Zhou Chongguang, that bastard, for letting Mumu start a new life. Qin Mu leaned on his shoulder. After a long time, she said softly, "Brother, she's back." Yi Muyun's body was obviously stiff. She didn't need to see to know how shocked he was. Over the years, almost no one dared to mention Cher in front of her brother, and she was the same. She vaguely knew that Cher's departure had something to do with her, but she didn't dare to ask. She admitted that she was timid and hid in her own world, unwilling to come out. But when she heard that Cher was back, she decided to end it all. Her brother was not married, and Cher should be single. Chin-moo took a step back and smiled faintly. I'll be leaving first. Brother, let's have a meal together another day. We haven't had a meal together for a long time. Yi Mu-yun came to his senses and nodded. Okay, I'll ask Guze to make an appointment. There was a hint of a smile in Chin-moo's eyes. Fortunately, I didn't ask your secretary, Jing Sini, to make an appointment. Yi Mu-yun heard the meaning in her tone and lowered his eyes. She is just a capable secretary. Chin-moo sighed and said, Brother, don't you find that Jing Sini is much more beautiful than before? Although she was not stunning, she did lose weight. She was wearing a secretary suit and had her black straight hair tied up, which made her look like a uniform. Yi Mu-yun looked at his sister and didn't answer. In his eyes, a secretary was just a secretary. She was just a walking machine. It didn't matter if she looked good on the outside. As for why he kept Jing Sini, he couldn't quite remember how capable she was when she graduated. All he remembered was that she was someone who had connections with Tang Cher, so he kept her. Seeing his attitude, Chin-moo didn't say anything more. Obviously, her brother didn't mean it, and there was no need to say more. After pausing for a moment, she got into the driver's car and left. In the car, Chin-moo thought that this kind of thing should be more formal. It would be better to talk about it in his office. So he told the driver, Uncle Zhao, let's go to Glory Light. Old Zhao was stunned for a moment. Then, he said, it's Mrs. first time going to Sir's company. Let me navigate it. Back then, when Chin-moo got married, the people around her were all sent by the Chin family. They were more or less afraid that she would be wronged. As for Zhou Chongwang, he never said anything. He probably didn't take it to heart. Chin-moo grunted in acknowledgement. Old Zhao quickly navigated the car and changed the route. When the black Audi arrived at the Glory Light building, it didn't cause a commotion. The car was too low-key. I'll go up for a while. Wait for me here, Uncle Zhao. Chin-moo's tone was gentle, and there was even a faint smile on her face. Old Zhao followed her out of the car. I'll smoke a few cigarettes. Actually, he was worried. It wasn't that he couldn't see it. It was just that Zhou Chongwang had never brought outside matters or women to Mississippi. Everyone tacitly agreed. Chapter 2105. Gu-mate picked it up and told the receptionist to let her go upstairs. The receptionist didn't suspect anything and let Chin-moo go upstairs. As soon as she left, the two receptionists started whispering to each other. I didn't expect Secretary Gu to have such a classy friend. One look and I can tell that she comes from a good family. She doesn't look like a prostitute at all. That's right. Zhou Zong's eyes aren't even half as bright as this girl. Lin Shui is upstairs now. Maybe Secretary Gu feels uncomfortable and wants to talk to her friend. The other person laughed. Zhou Zong seems to have neglected Secretary Gu recently. He's a man. How many years do you expect him to play with him? That's true. Their words more or less reached Chin-moo's ears. Chin-moo only smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Lin Shui was here. That was perfect. On the top floor, Gu-mei's hands trembled slightly as she held her phone. She knew that Chin-moo wasn't looking for her. She was probably checking on her. But she didn't stop her. Instead, she let Chin-moo come upstairs. Something was probably going on in Zhou Chongguang's office right now. Gumei looked at the red numbers on the elevator and pursed her lips. In the end, she chose to leave. With a ding, the elevator door opened. Qin Mu slowly walked out and walked towards Zhou Chongguang's office. The door was unlatched. It was probably because he had nothing to fear. Everything he did was unbridled. Just as she imagined, the man she had once been deeply infatuated with was making love with another young woman. His face was extremely distorted, and his jade-like eyes, and that woman was trying very hard to please him. The scene was unbearable. But she looked very calm. It was as if she had waited for this day for a long time. It was as if it was normal for this to happen. She didn't make any noise, so the man and woman who were immersed in love didn't immediately notice. After about 5 seconds, Zhou Chongguang suddenly looked up and saw Qin Mu standing at the door. His face became even more twisted. He almost immediately left the woman's body and pulled up his clothes. Qin Mu had counted for him. From the beginning to the end, it was no more than 10 seconds. She even secretly thought that he only had 10 seconds of patience for the woman under him. He didn't even bother to comfort her. What did this woman want from him? His money or his appearance? 28-year-old Zhou Chongguang. She naturally knew what her husband's figure was like. She had a married life with him, but it wasn't frequent. It was about once a week. After seeing how ruthless he was towards this woman, she thought to herself that the weekly session between them was considered a form of coping. Her husband was so passionate about other women. Just as Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang were looking at each other, the woman lying on the bed softly asked, "Chongguang, what's wrong?" Zhou Chongguang threw her clothes to her. "Put them on and leave now." Lin Shue's face was filled with shock, but she soon noticed that his gaze was not on her face. She was stunned and followed his gaze to the door. A beautiful girl was standing there. Lin Shue knew that she was Zhou Chongguang's wife. Lin Shue felt a little guilty. After all, she was stuck on the sofa by the Empress. She knew that Zhou Zong had no intention of getting a divorce, so she didn't dare to provoke the Empress. She obediently put on her clothes and looked at Zhou Chongguang lovingly for a while before leaving. Chapter 2106. Qin Mu smiled faintly and stretched out her hand to stop Lin Shue. Zhou Chongguang frowned. "Let her go. She has something to talk to me about. Do you think that I want to make things difficult for her?" Qin Mu smiled faintly. "Zhou Chongguang, don't worry. I just want to tell her that it's okay to be a little ambitious, because I'm going to divorce you." Lin Shue's mouth was agape, and she looked at Zhou Chongguang uneasily. "You go first." Zhou Chongguang's voice sounded strict. Lin Shue was a B-list celebrity, and she knew very well that it was not easy to get divorced from a wealthy family. At this moment, the best thing for her to do was to avoid this storm, so that she could reap benefits in the future. Lin Shue left quickly, but Zhou Chongguang's brows were still furrowed. He looked at Qin Mu, who was standing at the door. "Why didn't you come in? Do you think it's dirty?" Qin Mu did not say a word, but walked in directly and sat opposite the sofa where they were having sex. There was still a lingering scent in the air. It was a little disgusting. "Open the window," Qin Mu said lightly. Zhou Chongguang did not move, and only stared at her with his deep eyes. 8 years had passed, and he had long changed from a sunny young man to a cruel businessman. His face was still handsome, but his aura was completely different. Qin Mu was not afraid of him. If he did not move, she could only move herself. She did not care about the image of her husband having sex with another woman, but it did not mean that she was willing to stay in such a space. She got up and was about to open the blinds herself, but she had only taken 2 steps when he grabbed her slender wrist and she fell into a firm embrace. there was a hint of anger in Zhou Chongwang's eyes. Qin Mu interpreted it as anger from embarrassment. He stared at her. Just because of an insignificant woman. It doesn't matter whether she has it or not. Don't you know that, Zhou Chongwang? Qin Mu's voice was gentle, just like her brown curly hair. Lin Shui, 26 years old, those eyes. Zhou Chongwang, it's not easy to find so many similarities. She said it calmly, but his expression became a little gloomy. You investigated me. No need. Everyone knew that the glorious Zhou Zong kept a small celebrity. Also, Zhou Zong has an affair with his secretary. I'm probably the only fool in the world who doesn't know about it. Qin Mu smiled faintly. Or do you think that if you don't bring a woman home, I'll never know? Zhou Chongwang's face darkened. He scratched his head but did not let go of her. When did you find out? About 2 or 3 years ago. Qin Mu said quietly. I forgot about it myself. Sorry. Ever since she saw him for the first time, she had no feelings for him, for his body, and for his weekly obligations as a couple. And he had never realized that she had never moaned during sex with him. Not even a sound. Perhaps it was because the woman outside had completely satisfied him, so when he was with her, he could handle it completely and only need to vent once. Just like he had always thought, she would be happy and satisfied if he gave her a little. In Zhou Chongwang's eyes and heart, she, Qin Mu, couldn't leave him. So he never had to use his heart. Actually, he had already given his heart to someone else. Chapter 2107. Qin Mu didn't answer him immediately. She paused for a moment and said, maybe it's because I don't love him anymore, so it's not so unbearable. So that's why you only asked for a divorce 2 to 3 years later. Zhou Chongwang said sarcastically. Qin Mu shook her head. No. I just feel that it's meaningless to tie 2 people together who don't love each other. Zhou Chongwang narrowed his eyes and looked at her sharply. After a long while, he went forward and pinched her sharp chin. He asked in a soft but dangerous tone, are you in love with someone else? Ha! Just like how you loved me back then, like a moth flying into a flame. When he said that, he realized that he wasn't indifferent. He was even a little jealous. A man who attracted all her attention. Would she give herself to that man without any qualms? She was like a piece of wood under him, but in that man's arms, she was passionate. Qin Mu looked at him with clear eyes. Zhou Chongwang, whether I do or don't, I don't have to explain to you. She didn't want to talk to him about this because he wasn't worthy. What she wanted was a peaceful divorce. But her words ignited Zhou Chongwang's suppressed anger. In a man's heart, what she said was equivalent to admitting that she had an affair. Zhou Chongwang's Adam's apple kept moving as he stared at her gentle face. All these years, she had been pampered and didn't let her see his dark side. She was well protected. Now, she said that she was in love with someone else. Did she think that he, whose hands were stained with blood, was no longer worthy of her love? Zhou Chongwang didn't know what he was thinking. He didn't allow her to love someone else, so he pressed her head down violently and kissed her forcefully. Without giving her any chance to resist, he pressed her down on the sofa and exercised his rights as a husband. He remembered that the last time he had sex with her was half a month ago. When he hugged her last Saturday, she said that her period had come. It should be gone now. Just as he was flirting with another woman, he forcefully took her. Qin Mu screamed and struggled, but to no avail. Finally, his fiery passion was used on her. Finally, he was beastly to her for once. But she didn't feel anything at all. Instead, she felt disgusted and disgusted. She couldn't push him away. She couldn't resist him. She could only endure, without giving him any reaction. In the end, Zhou Chongguang let her go, feeling a little bored. He didn't tidy up his clothes. He just sat down casually, took a cigarette from the table, and lit it. He took a deep breath and looked at Qin Mu, who was still lying on the bed. You won't even let me touch you. Is that man really that good? Much better than me. Zhou Chongguang couldn't help but ask. It would have been better if she didn't say it, but the moment she said it, his heart was filled with rage, and he wished he could kill her. Actually, Qin Mu was very beautiful. But in bed, he was indifferent to her. He knew he was doing it on purpose. He liked her body, but he didn't want to indulge in it. 8 years. 8 years didn't change anything, except for her. She didn't love him anymore. She fell in love with someone else. Tell me the name of your adulterer. He smoked slowly, still looking at her messy appearance. I want to see who the man is that you've fallen in love with again. No one. Qin Mu sat up and frowned because of her messy appearance. Chapter 2108. She didn't want to shower in his place, so she took a tissue and cleaned herself up. Her actions were very calm, as if she had just had sex outside. It was very normal. Zhou Chongguang more or less understood women. Today's matter, any woman would go crazy and fight with him. What's more, he forced her to have sex on the same sofa. What's more, his wife was the proud and arrogant young miss of the Qin family. However, she held it in and didn't seem too angry. Zhou Chongguang felt his throat choking. She really didn't care about him anymore. Qin Mu continued to speak in a flat tone, no one. It's just that Zhou Chongguang, you're too dirty. Zhou Chongguang's heart felt as though it had been punched by a fist. He couldn't make a sound for a long time. I've already signed the agreement. I won't be tainted by the glory. That house was given to me by my mother, so please move out. Qin Mu explained the divorce in an orderly manner. She was extremely calm. Zhou Chongguang scoffed coldly, what's the point of keeping that house? Do you miss it? I'll sell it. Qin Mu told him honestly. At that moment, he felt as though his throat was choked. At that moment, the office door opened. Gu Mei stood at the door and was about to speak when Zhou Chongguang shouted angrily, "Scram!" Gu Mei was stunned. He had never been so rough with her. Qin Mu smiled faintly. There's no need to avoid it, Zhou Chongguang. I've seen you naked before. Her words were gentle, but they hit the nail on the head. Zhou Chongguang's expression was terrible and Gu Mei was even more embarrassed. Gu Mei closed the door after a while. She could roughly guess what happened in the office. Zhou Chongguang had slept with Qin Mu right after he had sex with Lin Shui. What did that mean? Gu Mei knew better than anyone else that Qin Mu wasn't the only one who had changed over the years, but Zhou Chongguang as well. Her body was pressed against the door, and her heart was secretly thinking that this move of hers might be able to win in one move, but perhaps, it would be a crushing defeat. She could tell that Qin Mu no longer loved Zhou Chongguang. If she loved him, she would not care and would not say sarcastic words so calmly. A woman he didn't love meant that he couldn't get her. What he couldn't get was the best. In the office, Zhou Chongguang tidied up his clothes. He looked at Qin Mu and moved his lips. Gu Mei and I are not what you think we are. You haven't slept with her, have you? Qin Mu looked at him and chuckled. Zhou Chongguang was a little embarrassed. Qin Mu, don't be so overbearing. You weren't like this in the past. There's no point in the past. Qin Mu lowered her eyes. Zhou Chongguang, let's part on good terms. It's been 8 years. The anger in your heart should have dissipated. His face instantly turned pale and his voice was so cold that ice beads could be seen. You know about it. You know that this marriage and the words you said to me are all for taking advantage of me, don't you? Qin Mu got up and took out a document from her bag. She pressed it on the table in front of him. Zhou Chongwang, I've signed on it. You can sign it. If you want to get Gu Mei or that little star, it's fine. Why make things difficult for each other? Zhou Chongwang's face became more and more unpleasant. After a long time, he said coldly, what if I want to make things difficult for you? Chapter 2109. The veins on Zhou Chongwang's forehead were popping out. When he went out this morning, all the servants at home had said goodbye to him respectfully. Even the cook had asked him what he wanted to eat for dinner, saying that it was for Madame. What the hell? Since when did Qin Mu know how to play these little tricks? Unbeknownst to him, they had been sleeping in the same bed for 2 years. He had always thought that he was the one dealing with her. But, it turned out that she was the one who was perfunctory. She lay on the bed like a block of wood. She had never taken the initiative to kiss him. It wasn't because she was shy or unromantic, but because she had no desire for him. At this moment, Zhou Chongwang felt as though a bucket of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. He gritted his teeth. I won't divorce. He took the agreement on the table and tore it into 2 without even looking at it. Then, he threw it into the trash can. Qin Mu did not say anything. Instead, she spoke gently, you're probably too hot-tempered. If your body isn't satisfied, you can take your luggage and look for a presidential suite. Then, you can find a woman that suits your taste. You don't have to force yourself to go home every day. And, I don't have to pretend to wait for you. Zhou Chongwang's face darkened. Qin Mu. His voice was cold. Is this your true self? Using the word true self to describe how much I hate you in my heart. So, divorce is the right thing to do. Qin Mu advised him kindly. Zhou Chongwang glared at her. I'll get it later. But, I won't get those women you're thinking of. He was a proud man. Even if she chased him away, he would not cling on. But, he had never thought of divorce. How could Qin Mu not guess it? She sighed. Zhou Chongwang, I'm no longer of any use to you, Zhou Chongwang suddenly asked, so, you've never gotten pregnant? He had never noticed it before. After all, his heart was not with her. But now that he thought about it, they had been married for 4 years. He had never used a condom when he had sex with her. But, his young body had never gotten pregnant even once. He had never thought about it before. But now, he understood. Ever since they got married and had sex for the first time, she had wanted to leave him. Her first time was after she became an adult. The thing she thought before didn't exist. She did not understand and was deceived by him. Qin Mu didn't deny it and nodded. Yes, we really don't need a child between us. She suddenly lowered her eyes and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. I don't want to be a mother either. When they got married, she was still a child, and he, actually didn't take much care of her. He just threw her to the servants and came home at night to sleep. Occasionally, he would sleep with her. They had been married for 4 years, and they were so unfamiliar with each other. It was ridiculous that he still thought that she still loved him. After hearing Qin Mu's words, Zhou Chongwang said thoughtfully, maybe your heart will settle down after you have a child. Today, I didn't use a condom. You don't have to take the medicine. From now on we're going to have a baby, he said decisively. Qin Mu laughed again. This time, it wasn't her usual gentle laugh. She laughed so hard that she almost cried. Zhou Chongwang, I want to divorce you. Have a baby. Let Gu Mei or one of those celebrities give birth to a baby for you. From B City to France, I think there will be women who will be willing. Qin Mu was so angry that she laughed. Also, don't touch me in the future. Disgusting. She spat out softly. Because you are dirty. Chapter 21:10. As she said that, she walked out and said calmly, "My lawyer will be here tomorrow. I hope you won't tear it up childishly again because it's not environmentally friendly." Zhou Chongguang was stunned at first, then he grabbed her sleeve and said angrily, "What are you doing?" Qin Mu watched him grab her arm and said, "Zhou Chongguang, I'm not doing anything. If you care about those women, I can transfer Gu Mei away. And Lin Shui, I can also give her a sum of money to leave." He thought for a moment before saying this. Qin Mu looked up at him calmly. "Zhou Chongguang, I don't care anymore." He was furious. "Have you ever cared? Why didn't you say it back then? When you couldn't take it anymore, you could divorce me." "Qin Mu, this is the most suitable way for you, huh?" Qin Mu was still expressionless. "If you don't feel comfortable with my divorce, you can sue me. I don't mind." Zhou Chongguang looked at her for a long time before saying, "I didn't know you were so eloquent. It's a pity that you're locked up at home every day. People will grow up eventually. You will wake up from your dreams." "Zhou Chongguang, I've woken up from my dream," she said softly, so softly that she didn't seem to be talking to him, but to herself. Zhou Chongguang closed his eyes. "I won't agree to a divorce. If it's for your reputation, you don't have to. Divorce is very common nowadays." Qin Mu smiled. "Zhou Chongguang, my love has hurt many people. I don't want to lie to myself anymore. Is it because she's back that you've decided to let your brother and her be together?" Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little fierce. "Don't forget that your brother has a girlfriend." Qin Mu's lips curled up slightly. "Even if we get married, we can still get a divorce. Not to mention, they are just boyfriend and girlfriend. What about you?" Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes at her. "You'll help others and let me off easily." As he spoke, he could not help but clasp her hand, as if she would not be able to escape. Qin Mu shook his head. "There's no such thing as letting go or not. Zhou Chongguang, if I still loved you, I don't think I'd let you off. I'd chase every woman who has slept with you far away. I'd either use money to get rid of them, or I'd scratch their faces so that they wouldn't dare to provoke you again." Finally, she murmured, "But I don't care anymore. There's no point in doing all this." Zhou Chongguang looked at her. "Let's divorce." Qin Mu said calmly. She wanted to break free from his hand, but Zhou Chongguang did not let go. He pursed his lips and said coldly, "Very well, use 2 or 3 years to heal yourself. Once you've recovered, we'll divorce." Qin Mu did not deny it. "Very well." Zhou Chongguang pursed his lips and let go of her. Qin Mu immediately walked out without a trace of reluctance. Zhou Chongguang looked at her back view and narrowed his eyes. At the door, Zhao Zi happened to bump into Qin Mu. He laughed dryly. "Sister-in-law, are you here to check on me?" Actually, he more or less knew what had happened. The news had spread in the company that Zhou Zong and Lin Shui had been caught red-handed by Mrs. Zhou. Zhao Zi had expected to see Qin Mu in tears, or at least heartache. However, Qin Mu was indifferent, just like before. Chapter 21:11. Qin Mu ignored him and took the elevator downstairs. As soon as Zhao Zi pushed the door open, the smell of the man and woman hit him in the face. He was stunned for a moment and then asked, "Is this left by sister-in-law or Lin Shui?" Zhou Chongguang was smoking in front of the French window. He pulled open the blinds and the night view of City B appeared in front of him. Thousands of neon lights couldn't shine into his heart. Both. Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little dry and he turned around to look at Zhao Zi. Zhao Zi was stunned. What was going on? That's not right. Given sister-in-law's love for you, why didn't she make a fuss? Don't tell me that you conquered her with your body. Zhao Zi didn't believe it. He was the vice president of Rongguang. He had been with Zhou Chongguang since he took over the company. He had watched Zhou Chongguang grow from a young boy to a rich businessman. To be honest, Chongguang had gone too far in the past few years. He still sympathized with Qin Mu. Zhou Chongguang pinched the cigarette and smiled. She didn't love me for a long time. She didn't come to catch me cheating today, but to ask for a divorce. Catching her cheating was just a coincidence, and it made her reason for a divorce more reasonable. Zhao Zi was stunned. The world was changing every day, but he had always believed that Qin Mu's love for Chongguang wouldn't change. Really, he had never seen such pure and passionate love. Qin Mu could be considered to have abandoned everything to follow Chongguang. Although no one had mentioned it in front of her, she had no reason not to suspect Tang Sher's disappearance. Now she said that she didn't love her anymore. It's been 2 or 3 years. She said, she had already found out about me and Gu Mei, as well as other women. Zhou Chongguang's expression darkened, leaving a long shadow under the neon lights. Zhao Zi stayed silent for a while before saying, "You want a divorce?" Zhou Chongguang didn't answer. Zhao Zi sighed softly, "Chongguang, if you cared a little about her, you wouldn't have kept Gu Mei by your side." No woman could tolerate her husband sleeping with his secretary for a long time. Even if Zhou Chongguang didn't have that kind of feelings for Gu Mei, he must have slept with her before. Zhou Chongguang's face was facing the outside as he faintly said, "She doesn't want anything anymore. She doesn't care anymore." Zhao Zi looked at his silhouette and felt that he seemed a little lonely. He said nothing. After a long time, Zhou Chongguang said calmly, "Find a detective to monitor her 24/7. I want to see what she's been up to recently. Or, did she fall in love with someone else?" Zhou Chongguang always felt that only by falling in love with another person would he have the courage to leave his current life. Zhao Zi frowned. If sister-in-law finds out, she might not be happy. She's going to divorce me. Why should I care about whether she's happy or not? Zhou Chongguang snorted coldly. At this time, Zhao Zi felt that Chongguang was very unhappy. Then all these years, although it was a little too much, Zhao Zi still asked, "Chongguang, after all these years, have you fallen in love with Qin Mu?" There was a reason for him to ask this. Qin Mu was very pretty, comparable to Tang Shui. Furthermore, she had a quiet personality, which was very attractive to men. All these years, Chongguang had left her at home and she had almost no contact with the outside world. Chapter 21:12. Qin Mu had never been touched by anyone. Did this count as liking her? Zhao Zi wanted to hear it. Zhou Chongguang said calmly, "I've never liked her." "Then let's get a divorce." Zhao Zi had mixed feelings. "Let her go." Zhou Chongguang looked at Zhao Zi and his gaze deepened. "I have no intention of changing my wife. Gu Mei is more suitable than her. No matter how you play outside, I think Gu Mei will tolerate it, and she will manage the company in good order." Zhao Zi suggested seriously. However, Zhou Chongguang rejected it immediately. A wife is not a subordinate. Chongguang, think about it carefully. Have you ever liked her? If you have, try to make it up to her. Don't hurt her heart. If you haven't, be in peace. Zhao Zi said this with confidence. He had been by Zhou Chongwang's side all these years and thought that he could say a few words about Zhou Chongwang's family affairs and feelings. Zhou Chongwang's gaze was cold. Zi, you seem to care about Qin Mu very much. Zhao Zi's expression didn't change. I just think she is a wife who deserves to be loved, not neglected. Zhou Chongwang's face darkened. A moment later, he said word by word, you like her. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Zhao Zi liked Qin Mu, so he had been speaking up for her. After he said that, Zhao Zi didn't deny it, the atmosphere was tense. Then, Zhou Chongwang threw a punch and hit Zhao Zi's nose solidly, almost fracturing it. With a bang, Zhao Zi's body fell onto the desk behind him, and he took another hit. He held the edge of the desk and stood up. He wiped his hand, which was full of blood. Zhou Chongwang stood there, his chest heaving. Zhao Zi, she is my wife. He had always treated Zhao Zi as a brother, but now Zhao Zi said that he liked his wife. This was simply, Zhao Zi's face was in a sorry state, but he did not cower. He calmly said, I like her, and I've liked her for many years. If you give her up, I will pursue her. Zhou Chongwang sneered and abruptly pulled off his tie. His voice was cold as he said, do you think she will accept you? Zi, in her heart, you and I are in the same nest. Stop dreaming. I'm different from you, Zhao Zi said quietly, I like her, and I won't hurt her. Zhou Chongwang was very annoyed. He could feel that Zhao Zi was serious. He took out a cigarette and lit it. After smoking half a cigarette, he said, give up. I won't divorce you. Zhao Zi looked at him and said, Chongwang, she won't like you anymore. Zhou Chongwang's hand that was holding the cigarette trembled. Zhao Zi continued, I think I know why, he smiled faintly. Her taste has never changed. You know Zhao Yan, right? Lin Yun's son, the most popular pianist back then. He was like the white moon. Oh yeah, he opened a restaurant at Second Ring Road. He would occasionally go there to play for an hour or two. Sister-in-law would also go there that day. The cigarette in Zhou Chongwang's hand broke into two. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhao Zi. Why didn't you say so earlier? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.